It became painfully apparent to the Evans family that Larry, their cat, had been staring at the same spot on the wall for hours. Toys and treats consistently failed to distract him, despite their best efforts. Their vet couldn't find anything wrong with her eyes or ears when they took her to the vet, out of concern. Larry's family became frustrated and worried as he continued to stare at the wall for days on end. There seemed to be something far more nefarious at work. Before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. They had 2 lovely children, Peter and Amelia, and were led by their parents, Beverly and Paul Evans. Albuquerque was where they lived. Beverly and Paul had been constantly being nagged by the children for a pet since the children returned from visiting their cousins. The kids had so much fun playing with their cousin's dog and cat that they now wanted pets too. A disagreement ensued between Beverly and Paul over whether their plan was, indeed, a decent one. Having a dog was going to spoil all of Paul's dedication and hard work. He had somewhat of a green thumb. In the end, they decided to get a little cat. Their decision to purchase them a cat was gleefully announced to the children. Overjoyed and eager to provide a loving home to but one cat, they sped off to the shelter immediately. As soon as Peter and Amelia arrived at the animal shelter, they fell in love with a pitch-black tabby cat. His yellow eyes immediately caught their attention. At first, the cat was shy, but soon came out of his shell and loved to play with the kids. Peter and Amelia finally had the pet they had always wished for. They decided to name him Lawrence, but called him Larry for short. The Evans family provided Larry with a variety of toys, so he could spend his days playing around the house. He played with the children when they returned from school, and the family could see he was content and happy. They did not notice Larry's strange behavior until one day. They didn't yet know it, but everything would soon change. A wall was facing Larry as he sat in the same spot. At first, the family didn't pay much attention to it. It might have been cozy and warm, which is why Larry liked it. His eyes were fixed on the wall as he stared at it. The fact that a cat would spend hours sitting in one place intrigued Beverly. What could be going on? Larry Evans's family initially thought he was just tired or bored. He refused to move from his spot on the floor, fixed on the same spot on the wall, despite their attempts to play with him. Taking note of Larry's unusual behavior, they noticed he had stopped eating and drinking water. Despite their concerns, they took him to the vet, who found no problems. Something had to be going on. Larry's behavior became increasingly concerning as the days passed. He remained fixated on the same spot on the wall, despite the Evans family's attempts to move him. He refused to eat or drink, even when Beverly moved his food and water bowls closer to him. They even tried taking him to another room, but as soon as they put him down, he bolted back to the same spot. Surely something was afoot. After fixing the leak in the kitchen, the family hired a handyman. His attention was drawn to Larry's gaze on the wall as he left. He muttered to himself, "Strange." Overhearing, Beverly asked if he knew what was happening. Beverly was suspicious about his reaction as he shook his head and left. It was a matter of days before Larry's behavior became unbearable, and the family was left unsettled. No matter what they did, they couldn't get him to wake up. Her sense of something being off nagged at her. Larry seemed to be trying to tell her something, but she didn't know what. Her husband, Paul, tried to calm her down by telling her cats are unpredictable creatures. Larry was no longer interested in playing with Peter and Amelia, which worried them. As a result of his fixation on the wall, they began to feel threatened. In spite of this, Beverly assured them that Larry might just have liked the warm location because he liked it so much. She and Paul's real worries were too private to share with them. Beverly got a fright of a lifetime one night. A scratching sound was heard on the bedroom door after everyone had already settled into bed. The door was opened by her as she got up. This was Larry trying to get into the building. For the remainder of the night, he lay on the bed. Beverly thought it was strange, but Larry seemed frightened. Larry was already gone when Beverly woke up the next morning. In the kitchen, Larry was back where he was when she went to make breakfast. She couldn't understand why he had gone to bed last night but was now sitting in the usual position. She wanted to know why something didn't add up. In the middle of the night, Larry's family heard strange noises coming from the wall on which he had been focusing. A thumping and scraping noise could be heard, but the sounds could not be identified. Despite searching the house, they found nothing unusual. In the midst of their panic, the family was kept on high alert by Larry's unwavering gaze. They would get to the bottom of things. Days turned into weeks, and the thumping sounds persisted. It grew louder and more persistent as the family ignored it, hoping it would go away on its own. Even though Paul was worried, he reassured his family that it could simply be a family of birds roosting in their walls. In spite of this, Beverly remained unconvinced. Beverly decided to check out what was going on while Paul was at work and the children were at school. Larry seemed much calmer during the day, and he wasn't staring as intently. She wondered if this was the end of her staring. The spot was still in front of him, but he didn't stare at it. Has anything moved on since it was there? That's what she thought. Her attention was once again caught by Larry staring at the wall later that day as she repaired dinner. Beverly was convinced that whatever was in the walls had returned, and Larry was now stressed again. When Peter put out his food, he hadn't even come to eat because he was so focused. The situation required drastic action, and Beverly knew it. Paul did not notice the cat when he entered the room. His wife's bizarre expression caught his attention. The woman stared at their pet nervously, chewing on her nails. His eyes followed her gaze until they landed where she was looking. His eyes widened at the sight. What on earth? By the minute, Larry's behavior was becoming stranger and stranger. After staring at the wall for a while, he began growling lowly and pressing his face against it. Suddenly, Paul noticed that his tail was moving back and forth slowly, almost hypnotically. Something horrifying was about to be discovered in their wall. The situation was confusing for Paul. Standing frozen, he watched as his wife drew closer to Larry. In an attempt to walk away from the wall, she lifted him up. As she watched, she noticed the cat's mouth was filled with foamy white drool. In the new room, Larry jumped back up and ran towards the wall the moment he was placed down. He continued to growl lowly. "Honey," Beverly breathed. "I think something bad is going on." As Paul watched Beverly freak out, he couldn't blame her. His spine was also tingling from the interaction. Nothing like this had ever happened before. Only one thing came to mind for Paul. Taking Larry's favorite food out of the bag, he placed it in the bowl. Paul put out food for the cat, but the cat was too focused to come to eat. They tried for hours on end to get their poor, distressed cat away from the wall, but nothing was working. They even tried closing him in a room, but he would start to cry, begging them to let him out. The situation was starting to scare Beverly and the kids. Paul wouldn't admit it, but he felt pretty uneasy too. They were in for a sinister discovery. Her bedroom door was left open that night as she lay in bed. Her mind was made up that Larry would return again to sleep in her room. Each night, it happened. He might just have been getting cold from sitting next to the wall for so long. It hadn't seemed sinister at all to Beverly. So she hoped that was the explanation. She heard a strange scratching sound coming from the walls as she drifted off to sleep. Her attention was focused on what she heard. In the walls, something seemed to be moving. A cautious Beverly walked to the wall where Larry had been staring all day. She pressed her ear against the wall to hear what was being said. It was indeed the inside wall that made the scratching noise. The walls sounded as if they were moving. A strange sound caught her attention, and she leaned closer. Do the walls seem to be scratched by something? Her eyes were fixed on the wall, where Larry had been staring throughout the day. She listened to the wall with her ear against it. There was indeed a scratching sound coming from within the wall. The next morning, Beverly could not sleep, so she contacted an exterminator. A contractor was recommended to inspect the walls since the exterminator didn't find any pests. He immediately noticed something was wrong with the wall when he arrived. The scratching was also audible to him. The exterminator arrived a few hours later and inspected the area. Despite not finding any pests, he suggested hiring a contractor to examine the walls. There was certainly something fishy going on, he said. The contractor immediately noticed something was wrong when he saw the wall. The scratching sound was also audible to him. In order to remove the drywall, he got out his tools. It was a waiting game for Beverly as he watched anxiously. She could see Larry's interest growing. It was almost like he would also solve the mystery. It didn't matter how hard the contractor hit the walls. He kept meowing. There was always a feeling in Beverly's mind that Larry knew something they didn't know. There was a small hole visible as the contractor peeled away the layers of drywall. The first time he looked through it, he was unable to see anything. He gasped in horror when he shone his flashlight inside. A small room was inside the wall. A secret room was hidden inside Beverly's walls. Despite the fact that it had been there for years, Beverly had never noticed it. The man rubbed his eyes and took a deep breath. Has his mind played tricks on him, or is the situation more dire than he believed? Sure enough, it was there when he looked again. A small room was hidden inside the wall. Inside the walls of Beverly's house was a secret room. Years had passed, and Beverly had never known about it. Standing behind him, the concerned woman heard his reaction. Her only problem was that she was unable to see anything. The strange discovery was hidden from her view by him. Her steps were hindered by a familiar sound before she could move forward. Again, Larry was growling at the wall. Staring down at the anxious cat, the man glanced over his shoulder. "Ma'am, would you mind holding him? I'm going to open this up a bit more." She quickly snatched Larry into her arms when the man asked her to. Her strong grip held him firmly as he tried to escape. Her search for answers was about to be answered. Beverly was stunned when the contractor revealed the secret room through the wall. She lived in that house for years without knowing it existed. The wall had always seemed ordinary to her. She couldn't believe what she was seeing, and she was creeped out. Their scratching and thumping sounds were still unaccounted for. A bird's nest was sought by the contractor. Staring at the wall, she couldn't find words to describe her feelings. Her attention was never drawn to the small room, and she never suspected anything. Despite this, she still lacked the answer she was looking for. Beverly couldn't believe what she was seeing. Nevertheless, scratching and thumping sounds remained unanswered. A bird's nest was sought by the contractor. He spent some time searching the room for nests, but was unable to find any. As cockroaches crawled all over the walls, he suggested to Beverly that they might be causing the scratching noises. There was a possibility, Beverly thought. Would small insects make a loud, thumping sound as well? There was still a doubt in Beverly's mind. Her mind still echoed with strange sounds. Exactly how are these tiny insects able to make such a loud thumping noise? Larry's behavior might be explained by this theory, but she wasn't completely convinced. It terrified her to think that something else lived in the secret room. The contractor boarded up the wall again at her request. Her plan was set in motion. To find out if anything was missing, she was going to install surveillance cameras around the house. As she stared at the wall, she felt this was more than just Larry staring. Her mission was to get to the bottom of whatever was there. The cameras were set up exactly where Beverly asked Paul to do so at the weekend. They were nervous and worried about what the cameras might show. Larry, too, needed peace because of this. In addition to rarely eating and playing, he was not in good health. The problem needed to be solved as soon as possible for Beverly. In addition to his wife and children, there were other factors involved. Their cat sat helplessly at the wall, stressed out over the last few days, as he watched helplessly. It was causing Larry suffering, and he too needed peace. He rarely ate or played, which was unhealthy for him. It was crucial that Beverly found the problem as soon as possible. The anxiety Beverly felt throughout the day was uncontrollable. Was there any hope that they would learn what Larry was stressing out over? As Beverly headed to bed after dinner, she turned on all the cameras. As she felt a wave of nervousness consume her, she began to shake. As she awaited Larry's arrival, she lay still. The clock struck midnight, just as he arrived. Then she grabbed her phone and watched to see if the cameras were active. The wait for something to appear was nerve-wracking for her. It wasn't until half an hour later that anything of interest happened. A soft footstep could be clearly heard by her. The meow of Larry sounded low. A movement caught her attention. The strange sound caused her to sit up. Frowning was all she could do. She certainly didn't think that was what it was, did she? Her ears became more accustomed to the sound as she listened. A soft sound of footsteps could be clearly heard. A low meow escaped Larry's lips. A movement caught her attention. She wasn't prepared for this. From their attic, cameras captured a man jumping down. Taking a step toward the kitchen, he crouched down. Seeing what she saw, Beverly couldn't believe it. An intruder had entered the house. She showed Paul the camera footage after waking him up. His first call to 911 was made immediately. For their safety, they stayed in the bedroom. When they eventually noticed that the police vehicle had pulled up, they saw their newfound enemy trying to escape through their attic entrance. Paul immediately jumped into pursuit. As Beverly let the cops in, he pulled down the man. Several months had passed since the guy had lived in their crawl space. Despite his promise, he just wanted to stay. He didn't want to hurt anyone. Despite being arrested, he was later released to a shelter after the Evans declined to press charges against him. After reviewing the past few weeks, Beverly and Paul tried to determine if any other signs had been missed. Their food was missing, but Larry had been blamed for it. Intruders took them instead of losing them, as they had assumed. Afterwards, Larry never sat by the wall again, and the Evans family saw him as their hero for warning them of the stranger. After reviewing the past few weeks, Beverly and Paul tried to figure out if any other signs had been missed. Despite noticing that some of their food had disappeared, they blamed Larry. It had been assumed that they had misplaced them, but now they realize that the intruder took them. The Evans family was grateful to Larry for warning them about the stranger living inside their house, and Larry never sat by the wall again. Disclaimer: in order to protect the privacy of those depicted, some names, locations, and identifying characteristics have been changed and are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblances to actual events or places or persons, living or dead, are entirely coincidental.